Allora, io dico solo una parola e poi come fa da interprete. Tanto benvenuti. Io credo che il tema di cui ci occuperemo oggi sia un tema molto importante. In questi anni di pandemia abbiamo capito che possiamo fare molte cose da remoto, che possiamo fare molte cose attraverso il digitale, che la presenza fisica è diventata, non dico relativa, perché rimane l'importanza dell'incontrarsi e delle relazioni viso a viso, ma molte cose si possono fare da remoto e si può fare da remoto anche consultazione di libri, di materiali e addirittura anche contemplazione di questi materiali. Quindi i musei digitali, che una volta erano cosa da relegare semmai proprio alla necessità, in realtà diventano molto importanti. Io credo che quindi questo incontro di oggi per costruire e migliorare i siti web attraverso i quali appunto consultare, studiare, fare ricerca e appunto anche contemplare siano davvero molto importanti. Il sito di cui in particolare ci occupiamo, quello di Urkesh, è un sito evidentemente molto importante, molto ben fatto, non so quanto fruibile magari da tutti, quindi non dagli esperti, ma da tutti, perché a questo forse anche Giorgio e Marilyn guardano, no? Cioè a far sì che il loro sito sia fruibile da più persone possibili. Quindi ci interessa molto sentire gli esperti, in particolare il professor Paolini del Politecnico, e spero voglia darci un contributo da questo punto di vista generoso, e su questo contiamo naturalmente, e quindi non mi resta che augurare a tutti un buon lavoro. Grazie. Grazie a Giorgio, grazie a Marilyn, grazie a Paolo Paolini, grazie a Graz. Va bene, buon lavoro.
Just a brief summary that she said that it's very important, especially in today's post-pandemic world, to consider also various ways of accessing information and data, especially the remote and online access of material, and that in the particular case of Urkesh, it's interesting that it's accessible by various audiences, and that sense of access is something that we're going to talk about, especially together with Professor Polimi and
yeah, the notion of contemplation is interesting that Maria Agostina brought up, because in a way it catches the goal of what it is that we want to do. You see a little better in the future, in the course of the presentation. The fruition, she was also talking about the need to make websites accessible. That is a little less our concern in a way, because the main concern is to create a scholarly website that speaks to scholars, not really to the mass public. And I also would like to welcome those who are following us online, in particular Luca Peronel, who will be responding. Thank you, Luca, for being with us. He just came back from Iraq and is on quarantine at home here in Milan, but quarantining. So we're really glad that you're with us, because in a way, the idea of this roundtable was to have a exploratory session where we present the work that we have been doing in order to get a response from a few people. So it's really meant to be a conversation. a discourse, in a manner of speaking, meaning that we want to have our various points of view discourse with each other. And so the input of an archaeologist from the outside, Luca, who has not really used our, maybe may have used it in fact, but what I'm saying is that he has not been part of our production team. Or in the audience, we also have Mr. Professor Polimi from the Politecnico, Will Reynolds, who is a specialist in conservation and heritage conservation. And this is a topic that is going to come up in the presentation of Laerke later on. So it's really a interlacing of interests. We also have like to okay.
No, scusate Danila, meglio se riaccendi il tuo e spegni quello del professore e magari punta il video su di lui così.
Okay. It's a very symphonic setting.
Riaccendi il tuo microfono, Danila.
Okay.
Così.
So, so I was saying that it's an exploratory meeting in which we want to present and discuss with us in our group, and then see how it can be expanded beyond that. And it's a way to clarify our own goals. Okay, now my thing is not working. No, sorry, yeah, okay. So the emphasis, as the title says, will be on digital discourse on the one hand and on website publishing on the other. How do they relate? In other words, the end goal is to have a website publishing that is of a scholarly standard, different from what we normally have nowadays. And the way to achieve it is to put in practice this digital discourse, which is what I like to explain. The normal use of websites in terms of the argument has been informational, meaning that most of the websites we have are either of a discursive nature, and it's a running text either in the format of a PDF or of an HTML type of text, which, however, is really self-contained. It does not have links. They may have links, but they tend to be informational links that lead to some additional bit of information, but they're not really specifically interlaced with each other. Whereas the notion of a discourse is precisely a website that aims at integrating the data in all of their complexity, which is something we do have on the web. You know, there are plenty of scholarly sites that have, in fact, all of the websites that aim at scholarly, that have a scholarly aim, are essentially databases, extremely complex and extremely rich and extremely useful, of course. We are not denying that by any means, and we're doing it ourselves. But what is lacking is the integration of these databases with an argument that is properly constructed structurally as linked to the databases. It is in this sense, then, that we can think of digitality as a conceptual dimension, and not just as a electronic, technical or electronic dimension. A PDF is certainly, it's digital in quotes, but it's digital in the sense of being electronic. It does not really differ from a printed text, except for the fact of being searchable and of having occasional links. But these links are really not structurally related. By structurally related is something that I will try to explain as we proceed. So they're really, they remain self-contained. And the websites that contain these are precisely containers, meaning that they have data that are stored and made available in very differentiated ways through the categorization of a database, but not tied to the to a discourse. So it is in this way that we want to reach the goal of a website publishing that is really scholarly in nature. One of the things that we all, I think, know from the academic setting is that publishing online is not easily seen as something that goes to the credit of the individual who is doing it the way a book or an article does. In other words, there is really little credential attached to a digital publication, in particular to a website. And I think that that ought to be changed, but not to be changed in order to convince people that they should, convince institutions that they should accept for rating the websites, but rather changing really the nature of the website. That's kind of the goal. I will deal then with a few points that I hope will help to make clear this. And even for some of you who have worked closely with us, I hope that some of these will help clarify the goals in ways that we have really not done in our own research group up until now. So let's start with the notion of digitality. And I will start with a couple of considerations about pre-digital linearity and multilinearity. The Stele of Hammurabi, so-called code, is really not a code, but in a sense, it's a political text which includes all the decrees that he, as a supreme judge of the land, adopts and wants to make as a precedent for everything else. Anyway, that's not really critical for us. The point I want to make is this. The whole stele, which you see here at the top, there are the king in front of the god of justice, the Shamash. And then below here and in the back of the stele, there is a very long text of which this is detailed. It happens to be written from top to bottom, which is an archaic trait of cuneiform writing. But again, that's not of interest to us. What of interest to us is the translation that I give in terms to point out the structure of the text. It's essentially a single sentence, the whole code. The very beginning is a temporal clause. The very first words are when the gods called me. And then he goes on to mention all the gods. And then he says, I, Hammurabi, and then he gives a long series of epithets for himself. The king who built this, who conquered that, and so on. So the first 5 columns are this very long temporal clause, at the end of which it's as a resumption. It says, on that day, this is the beginning of the 6th column, And abruptly, the decrees begin. If a man accuses another unjustly, and so on, and it goes on, there are 282 decrees, one after the other, that occupy, as I say, the whole front and the whole back. And then he says, these are the just decrees. So this is the resolution of the temporal clause. These are the just decrees which Hammurabi decreed, and then again, a series of epithets for himself. So the point I want to make is that this is one of the most linear texts you can think of. The whole code is essentially one linear sentence. And the power, the rhetorical power of it is that the decrees are encased, as it were, within this highly linear understanding, or it's a rhetorical mean, in other words, that comes really to the fore very significantly. In contrast with this, we have a non-linearity already from the very beginning. Code of Hammurabi is around 1770 BC. And this is an administrative tablet a little before that, 2050 more or less. It's about the size of a telephone book. Clay, the other one is stone, obviously. But again, these are details that are no concern to us. What is interesting is that this is a highly non-linear text. You see, on the left end I marked in red just the beginning of a few lines on the left, which show you the number 3, and then it says sheep and such, and then 2 and something else, goats, etc. So it's a list of animals. At the end, which is the reverse of the tablet, as it happens, the front, the column go from left to right. On the back, because you flip it, it goes from right to left. So the final column is the first one on the left of the reverse. The word that is highlighted here is the word for total. And then there are the totals of, so the first is the oxen. So there are 14. The little wedge is 10, and then I guess it's maybe 6 oxen, and so on. So it gives the subtotals, and then the grand total, which is, as it happens to be written, the big vertical is 10. So 10, 60, I mean, the big one stands for 60. So 60 times 5, because there are 5 big vertical wedges, then a 10, and then a 4. So 314 animals, and then the date. So here there is no argument, no discourse at all. It's really non-linear, and it's a ledger, just like our ledgers, you know, the spreadsheets. In a sense, it's like a spreadsheet. So this to take us back to the contrast between linearity and non-linearity at the very beginning. In more recent times, so beginning more or less with the beginning of print, we first have the introduction of footnotes. Footnotes really begin only with the printing press, but they really become very prevalent only in the 18th century. And this book is a very, very beautiful book, actually, because it's very well written. And the first chapter is a description of the footnotes in Gibbon's Decline of the Roman Empire. And this is why it's so cute, is because he points out how Gibbon related to the notes all of his very sarcastic comments about Rome. So it's like a running commentary of a different tonality than the main text. But it's actually footnotes in history writing. It's not the footnote in general, but that's again of no interest to us. The point is that the footnote, the notion of a footnote, is similar to the notion of a discourse, except it's on digital. Because the footnote carries a link to something else, which is not immediately available. But you have to go to the library and find out for yourself what the footnote actually says. But in effect, this is a sentence from Grafton's book. He says that the historian has two complementary tasks. On the one hand, they must examine all the sources, which is the data, and on the other, construct a narrative or argument, which again points out what I think we should be doing in a digital world much better than it could be done before. So that's what I'm trying to work towards, is to establish a type of digital exploitation of digitality that does justice. This is a very interesting other way of explaining a pre-digital multilinearity. And it was pointed out to us by a colleague in Madrid, where we were also, Marilyn and I, speaking about this, the Biblia Complutense, which is from 1514, so just a couple of decades after the introduction of the printing press in Europe, at any rate, by Gutenberg. Look at the detail. There is the Hebrew in the central column, the Latin on the left. Then there are others that are not shown in this detail. But the point of the detailed view is that it shows and my internet connection is, there are letters that relate. The A sends to the right to the lexical element, which is the word for head or the beginning. And on the left, it refers to the Latin text. So it says, again, it's a really multilinear, in this case, indicated synoptically, non-digitally, obviously, synoptically, but with a very ambitious, because this runs through the whole Bible. So this is the beginning of Genesis, and the whole Old Testament is given in this way. So it's really a highly sophisticated use just a few decades after so it's a way, after the introduction of the printing press, it's a way of showing how technology is really put to good use right away. Something like this could not really, well, I guess it could have been done on a, yeah, I guess in a manuscript way, but it's really the printing press that triggers the interest in this kind of very detailed. In fact, there are synopses before the printing press, but this kind of detail is really unique. And then the cutest one is this. 1588, the book wheel, which is published in this book, the Diverse ed artificiose macchine del capitano Agostino Ramelli. He never built anything, but he drew all sorts of diverse artificiose macchine, like this one. And you can see very well, they are the books that are all open. And as you turn the wheel, you go to the book that you want to refer to. So it is, again, really a multilinear. In this case, it's fully multilinear because you really go from one to the other book physically. So it's pre-digital, but it aims in the same direction. Of course, you begin to see, though, perhaps better what I'm aiming for. There is nothing structural. It's not that one book is written in function of the other. It just so happens that they relate in some way to each other, but they're not structurally linked. So the various, what would you call it? Well, the books, the various books are really totally independent, but if more or less they deal with the same subject, it's convenient to have. And of course, it's very limited. There may be, what, 12 perhaps books on a wheel like this, which he never built, but has been built actually by some university, someplace, to just recently to show how it works. Okay, so this to explain the notion of linearity and multilinearity. The notion of linearity and multilinearity is different from non-linearity, which is what we normally speak of, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The concept is there. It's not linked to digitality, but digitality allows us to do it to a much higher degree. So what we want to speak of is the digital linearity, and we will refer to it in terms of two projects. One is the site of Urkesh, and the other, the 4 banks projects. Just a couple of words for those of you who may not be quite familiar. Urkesh is a site we have been excavating, and it's very important historically. It's the earliest known Hurrian city. It's one of the earliest cities in history, in fact, because it dates back to about 4000. It's abandoned around 1200. The yellow is a big empire of the Akkadians, and Urkesh is a smaller independent state, small, but it remains independent. It's very important. There are some very significant monuments, this very monumental staircase to a temple, a royal palace, and a underground shaft to the netherworld. So these are, they all date to about the middle of the 3rd millennium, what we have seen here. But there are earlier levels and some later ones too. So to give you an idea of how those who haven't seen the site before, how important the site is. But what we started doing from the beginning, and we especially, it's Marilyn and Federico with myself in the field, has been, the ambition was to record the totality of the observations made, because on the excavations, the real thing that is objective is the observation. Once you detach one thing from the other, it's no longer there. You cannot repeat the experiment ever. But what you can repeat is the observation of the observations that have been made while excavating. And so our ambition was to do that, but to do it not as a dump, you know, not dumping every single, which is in effect what happens with the journals or databases that accumulate more and more data, but are not really from the beginning conceived as interacting with each other. So we wanted to have both, first of all, to retain not only the observations made after the excavation on the objects, but on the process of excavation itself. And in this sense, then, it was an experiment in combining both linearity and multilinearity. In this sense, we can say that the physical record, that is this enormous quantity of data, there are literally millions of observations that have been stored up in our record. So, and it's all based on the fact that we do have millions of bits of information in the ground that come out. Millions means the reason why the number is so high is because it's just not only a stone or a monument or a vessel, but fragments like shirts, lithics, bones, etc. So it adds up really easily to an enormous quantity of data. And in that sense, it's natively digital, meaning that the data are so disconnected that they, in and of themselves, are just fragments that need to be brought together. The referential record is the conceptual structure that we superimpose on these data. And it is in this way that we construct a linear digital narrative in the referential record. That's what we have been aiming to do, and what I'll show you very briefly now. And Marilyn will show it in a little more detail in a minute. This is a seal impression, and if I had the website open, I would scroll down. It's these 3 screens, basically, that give us the history. It's like the biography, as Marilyn says, of this particular little piece. It's about this big piece of clay. And this is one of the 2 of the records. Each record is dated and the initial, and the initial links to the description of who it is that made this observation. And what is interesting in this case is that on the same day, which was the 20th of September of 2002, the excavator made a very quick, brief note. And then on the next day, Marilyn, MKB, made a longer description of the thing before it was cleaned. Then there is a record of the, which I don't have here, the conservator who cleans it, it goes back to me. So there is a history of the observations that are, however, strung together in a narrative way. This is still segmented, but it's really a narrative because the like you see here, the step between the excavator and the expert is in a sense a narrative. 4 years later, in 2006, in October, we had a review of the chronology, and so we assigned strata according to a new categorization of strata. Again, the detail of strata is not matter. What is important is that there is this continuity through time, which is, however, linked in a narrative fashion, which are the first three things you saw. The pictures also all come together. The picture of the excavation in the find spot in the first place, the details of the object itself, the drawings, and if you click on any of them, of course, you get the larger picture. So what we have are really fragments that coalesce into unity. They're records by different people at different times, and we have the same type of narrative, you see, for every single element, not just for a scene impression is immediately significant. So the excavator had immediately noticed it. But even the smallest sherd ends up having this categorization. And that's something Marilyn will show you in a moment. That's what global means, that every single piece gets its own biography. There is no discrimination. Nonlinearity is the current catchword, and it's useful to reflect on it for a moment in order to understand better what we mean by multilinearity. So this is an example of non-linear, and it's a way in which I, and I imagine most of us, if not all of us, use the web. You start out, you look up Urkesh, and you get curious about the 4th millennium. So you click on the 4th millennium, and then you go on to say the 4th millennium sends us to Sumer. And then there is a link to prehistory. This is also from Wikipedia. So you go open prehistory, and there you get interested into Paleolithic. You click out to Paleolithic, and by the end, you really don't know why you've gotten there. You forget the whole sequence. And so the going back to Urkesh can happen, of course, but it's this dotted line. So this is what non-linearity means. Multilinearity instead, which is really the great potential that we want to discuss, to highlight, is this. If we have a linear sequence, which is, let's call it a track, but this track, in the non-linear understanding of things, that various tracks are related in this way. First of all, they're not structurally built one for the other. Where we saw now, the Paleolithic was not built in function of Urkesh. So there is information to be gotten, but the link among the various tracks is really only informational and not structural. The linear instead is, the multilinear is systemic, meaning that each track is built in function, not really in function of the other, but potentially, let's say, in function of the other. So this is the way in which we can show the relationship among the various tracks in the case of a anecdotal or informational sequence. So you go from one to the other like this, whereas this would be the representation of the structural codependence of the various tracks. And we can describe this further by saying that in the informational setup or the nonlinear, each track is constructed independently without really thinking of the other. Whereas in this case, there is a tight reciprocal interdependence among the various tracks. The interlacing is therefore unstructured in the case of informational websites, whereas it's structural in the case of the systemic. And the synchronic aspect is very important. The fact that the in the small example of the seal impression showed, the fact that the chronology comes at the end is 4 years later, but it's synchronic, meaning that they are all linked together. So synchronic in the sense of, in a linguistic sense of the Saussurean concept of synchrony. So they're not contemporary, but they're synchronic because they belong to the same system where each element depends on the other. So that's why there's a structural interlacing and reciprocal interdependence. And this is now exemplifying, or using our example, if we have the track A, let's say, would be the sealing, the little biography we saw before. The track B would be the description of the find spot, which is written and is not written in function of it. You see the point. The find spot is described in its own totality, but it is the totality that explains the location or the emplacement of the piece, and at the same time, the piece helps to understand, for instance, the chronology and the function of the accumulation where this was found. So in this sense, we have this interrelationship. Track C is the typology. So in this case, Marilyn wrote this chapter, Glyptics for the unit, it's the excavation unit where the seal impression was found. And one paragraph describes this item 108, which happens to be our seal impression. But here it's described in function of the other seals. So seal impression. So there is a typological niche, as it were, within which the seal impression, and then the chronology. So the phase in which, and the strata in which this has been found is tied into all the others. So it's in this sense that they're really all interrelated, because the chronology is also based on the seal impression. And conversely, seal impression is dated because of all the other things that are dated at the same time. This is this kind of extremely complex interlacing that is really only possible in the digital world. So in a way, this, to go back to our book wheel, you see A, B, and C in the Ramelli book wheel are really not certainly written in function of each other. So it's really a very opaque anticipation of what digitality can really do. And then to finish, a contrast in a sense with digital humanities. We speak a lot of digital humanities, departments and whatnot, academically, etc. But we really need to go beyond that. Digital humanities are very much tied to the fragment and to the technique. It would be as if, you know, the discovery of photography changed the way of documenting graphically the items that were found. But it is not the essence of the description. It's just a better technical way of rendering the object itself. So, and in any case, the digital humanities tend to focus so much on the technique that they end up really being very myopic and looking only at the individual fragments. And the current scholarly websites are indicative of this, because they're either, as I was saying at the beginning, databases, which certainly privilege the fragments to the hilt, or they're purely linear, not multilinear, like a PDF or a plain HTML text. And the digital discourse instead aims to be the integration of the two, as I have tried to show. So what digital humanism really should do is to precisely to go beyond the fragment. And one way to do this is to aim for the whole in its full complexity. So this interlacing of the elements accepts the fragments. And you saw the care with which we documented the fragment, the observation of the excavator, the observation of Marilyn as the expert of the seal impression. So the fragment is fundamental, but at the same time, the whole, that is the meaning that comes out only of the comparison of all of these pieces, is what ultimately matters. And there is a great deal of relevance in all of this for hermeneutics and epistemology. How do we end up interpreting, understanding things, and ultimately simply knowing them? So with this, now we go on to three other presentations that will explain to us in slightly more detail what I have been saying and exemplifying it. The first is the Urkesh Global Record, to which I have referred in very general terms, and Marilyn will give you a more complete insight into what it really does. And bear in mind that that's also how this whole project really kind of developed. That is, there's a confrontation with the need to do justice to the record, to the physical record, through a overlaid conceptual record, which is the precisely the global record. And then the four banks is a title that I've been using for the bibliographical, we can say, websites. And I'm working, I had hoped to finish, but I didn't finish yet by today. In a hub website, I will explain better the notion of these bibliographical websites, but we have two instead, which are really, one is published and the other is about ready to be published. The first is the one on archaeological, on the book of archaeological reason, which Laerke will present, and the third one, or the second book, is the one on Mesopotamian religion and spirituality, about which Jonah will speak. So that's my talk, and now we go on to Mary. Perhaps we leave the questions at the end, but if there are some urgent questions, otherwise we'll wait until it's all finished. Now, I guess how do we do this? I guess, and show. For now.
This is so on the nitty-gritty of this website, and so you'll see a lot of details, but there are details, as Giorgio showed you, which all come together in this digital narratives, and then you'll see how the narratives come together in the digital discourse. As an introduction, I'll give you some background to my presentation, but that in section 2, the narratives unfold around the moment of excavation, and we'll see how that data is entered. And then we will see in section 3, that narrative that is based on the typological analysis. And I will conclude with a reflection on how these digital narratives come together in the implementation of the digital discourse. First, I will show you the global record as a whole before focusing on the ceramics portion. The global record constructs a proper digital discourse by structuring the data according to clearly articulated parameters. That's good because then it shows you always know the relationships because the parameters are so clear. Each individual element is explicitly linked to the broader categories, so that a single piece of evidence, say a shirt, there are thousands upon thousands of shirts from any Near Eastern historical excavation. Each one of these little pieces can be placed within progressively higher nodes, such as the stratigraphy, the chronology, as Giorgio showed you. It's important to stress that in the excavation process, an enormous quantity of bits of information come out, and Giorgio also mentioned that. But I want to stress that because this is very important on how to deal with this enormous quantity. However, in an excavation, what you find is this quantity is discontinuous with regard to function, with regard to typology, sometimes with regard to chronology, and no other kind of classification. It's just random in many, many cases. I mean, we're archaeologists, and so we're thrilled when it's not random, but many times it's random. This is the first page of the Urkesh Global Record. And up there, you see the totality of the full documentation in this digital format. It opens with this overview of the whole website. And the horizontal bar at the top shows the menu of the different sections of the menu. And if you click on record, we go to the record page, and we see that you can access a lot of information from this left-hand side. And one of them are the individual excavation units. And one of our, I won't just describe, what these units mean. We're not interested here in the details of the excavation. We're interested in the system. And so this first unit that we see on this page is the unit A16. And the sidebar on the left-hand side, that is this one with the red background, presents a narrative of the overall stratigraphy and the typological categories found in the unit. The details of the stratigraphy and are included in the right-hand side. So for instance, you see the arrow that goes to features. And this is the excavation unit A16. The unit is comprised of 8 squares, which are 5 by 5 meters each. So it is a relatively small unit, but look at this. From this unit, we had almost 60,000 ceramic items. We're talking about vessels and sherds of all type. And look at all of the other items that we found. Look at all the photography, the drawings, and as a whole, there are over 4 million, almost 4.5 million records just from this 8 squares. Ceramics are the most common artifact that we find in historical excavations. And they are diverse in all kinds of ways, which we'll see. When we think about pottery, we always think about, whole vessels, and certainly from ceramic excavations, plenty of whole vessels come up, but really the quantity, it comes in looking at these sherds, these little pieces. When we are thinking of ceramics, we are impressed with this large quantity. We are dealing really here with truly big data. This is quantitatively, we have analyzed about 1 million sherds from and whole vessels. And we see that in the following images, there are, these are just vessels that have come from our site at various seasons. And this is our getting together the whole vessels to send to the museum. This graphic Yeah, this graphic shows totals of ceramics from just 10 of our excavation units connected with the palace and the temple. They account for over 300,000 sherds and vessels. And they are mostly simple broken pieces of pottery. That is a pottery that has maybe a little trace of a rim or a little trace of a base. But they're also just body sherds from the vessel. And this takes us to the second aspect of the big data, the qualitative aspect. The data is structured according to clearly articulated nodes so that each individual element is explicitly linked to broader categories. And you see that, and the broader categories are clear so that they show you how you got there and how you can go on to the next click. Interconnected multi-nodal analysis. You see that that's also one of the aspects of archaeology. You know, there's all kinds of ways of approaching this kind of data. And this multinodal analysis is made possible by our system, which brings together a great variety of different types of analysis, which I will talk about next. Part of the website includes sections that consist of a narrative in a standard prose. So the standard prose, however, is closely tied to, in the website, through descriptions and tabulations of various types. If we look at A16 on the left-hand side, we see under typology, yes, this is the typology, we have the ceramics section, and in this section, we see what the tabulations are. And an important part of this is the frequencies. And these are frequencies only of A16. We're not talking about any other part of the excavation in this part of the website. Here we see the frequencies by type of clay and inclusions in the ceramics. And so we see that this chaff tempered ware is very frequent. So it's about 57% of this almost 60,000 ceramics that we have in just this unit. All of these units, all of these ceramics made in this ware are also connected to their context. And so you can always get back to the context if you're interested in this. The next part that we want to look at is what we call segmented narratives. That is segmented, that is construed by placing in a given order the multiple observations that are made. And Georgia was also referring to this. These observations serve as minimal constituents of a special syntax that organizes these constituents in a meaningful sequence, and the syntax is always very clear and obvious. So let's look at one piece. In A16, Q means things that we have gathered by quantity. So in this Q lot 345, we see that we have the stratigraphic emplacement and the chronology of the features. So here you see the volumetric localization highlighted, for instance, and the context association and the time sequence. So you always see where you are. Thus, if we look at, if we look at A16 in this feature, we can see that we have all of these sherds. So we had 10 sherds, which are described carefully there. And they are also described, the feature, and every feature is described over there by clicking on the numbers to the right. And then we can also see the details of a single sherd and vessels. And so here we see this stratigraphy, the typology, you know, RH tempered. And if we click on this, we see, we see, this is more of the record, and that's photographs of the sherds. You saw, Giorgio showed you the photographs of the seal impression. And if we click on the photographs, they become bigger every time. Now, we want to, here are the technical details. Why am I? Okay. I want to focus in now on what we call the biography of a sherd. And it shows you the description of the sherd and the parallel tracks that can that are attached to it. Here is a, oh no, how can it keeps, oh, I can't get back to it. I don't know why, but I can't get back. I want to go to, okay, here is, okay, now I got back. Thank you. Here is a sherd. It's just a simple sherd. It's nothing unusual, but I want to show you that it isn't just unusual things we are categorizing in this digital narrative, but we are trying to categorize everything. So this is a simple pottery sherd with a folded rim. It's from a jar. It doesn't seem important, but we're going to see its biography. Okay, this is the digital narrative page from the J5. This one comes from J5, not A16, but that doesn't matter. From the J5 book. And so it is in Q lot 4333, and it's P, which is the number of the sherd, P8. Okay, here it is. Here is the simple sherd. And we're going to see how in the biography it is linked to parallel tracks. Okay, now, okay, I don't know why it keeps skipping, but anyway, we are going to see that you can click on it and it goes to the feature. So it goes to the context that the sherd has been found in. So this is a whole parallel track. The stratigraphy of where it was found. This is a parallel track. No, sorry, this goes back to the description of the sherd. Here you see that it is in a ware that's called, and it is a jar, a ware that's called chaff tempered ware. And then the next parallel track that we're looking at here is the one of description of all of the wares. So that's the chop-tempered ware. This is the description of the chop-tempered ware. And besides, over there on the left, there are a number of these third and second millennium wares that are described. And besides, you see in the center that they are also described according to their chronological periods, because of course there are some variations through time. Then we also have the details of the shape. And so going back to the biography of the shirt, we know that it is a jar. Here we can see the details, neck to restricted necks, and it is type 101. Okay. So if we go to the shape codes, we have in a parallel track a complete listing of the shape codes. And here is the description of our, well, the red line goes through the number, but anyway, you can see there that it is number 101 and the description. Okay. And another parallel track takes us to some frequencies. And if here we have compared the frequencies in J1 with the frequencies in J5, which are two touching excavation units. So they were interesting to compare. And here we see from the ED3 shape shirts, there are 721, and then the jars are 33%, which is interesting from the viewpoint of the archaeologist. But it shows you what kind of details you can have in these, in this. So if we look now at the ceramics digital, book, we see that the ceramics digital book covers the entire ceramic corpus excavated. So before we were looking at the just one digital book from one excavation unit. Now it covers all of the excavation units. So the current total, as Giorgio told you, is about 1 million items. We have seen how how we are able to cover one shirt. We've seen that in the biography of the shirt. And we now want to look at the entire corpus excavated in the ceramics book. These are the main sections in the ceramics digital book. And we're going to see on the left-hand side, yes, on the left-hand side, the categorization system, and then on the right, the horizons and the shapes. And those are the things that I will focus on. On the left-hand side, the categorization here, it is blown up so you can more easily see it. We see that these are the topics that are focused on. And if we look at wares, which we looked at before in our biography of the shirt, we look at wares, you see again, it goes back to that page that I showed you before, the ware description and the by time period also. So this is the CH ware and subdivided into periods. And if we look at one period, the Mitanni period, no. Okay, now we see the description of CH ware, that is this chaff-tempered ware, exactly in the Mitanni period, and then the photographs. And of course, if you click on the photographs, they are enlarged too. On the right-hand side, we have horizons, and horizon means a very broad chronological period. And so this is the introduction of the ED2 horizon, so about 2700 BC. And so this is the ED2 horizon and the discussion of it. And they, if we want to look at, for instance, one category like jars, there's a whole list with the details of the jars that have the jar types from ED2 that we have found on our excavations. And if we see this, we see a whole gamut of the jar types that we have found from ED2 on our excavations. Then there are also going to the shapes. We have from the categorization on the left-hand side, we have a complete list of the shapes. And we also have details like decoration. Here you can see all of the codes for decoration. And then we have statistics for all of these shapes. So it's something that is also very useful. So the shape synopsis, we are here looking at bowls. And so now I want to go to the conclusions. So reflecting back on what I've shown you, the meaning of what we term digital narrative begins to emerge. The first type of narrative is the form of the standard prose, but one that is tightly connected through hyperlinks to other narratives and to the other data. The second type is a segmented narrative. No. Okay, here we go. The second type is a segmented narrative, what I have called the biography of a given item. It is made up of fragments which require their unity by virtue of the syntactic sequence that is inherent in the categorization system. And to illustrate this point, I want to give you a translation. This is kind of cute to see it in translation. So this is a translation of the description connected with one sherd. It's a sherd belonging to a ceramic lot, and who excavated. This lot was in feature 104, which just then describes what 104 is, and the chronology describes what the chronology. The sherd is chaff-tempered, and when it was analyzed and by Minna Happanen, who was a long experience and has worked in Mozambique 3 seasons. So this is what these 3 pages will tell you. It's amazing, really. Okay. This brings out the essential features of the system, I think. Namely, one is the interlacing of details. This derives from the saturation of hyperlinks that are programmed as part of the coherent whole. And you've seen the coherent whole all along. No. Another essential feature of the system is the capillarity of nodes, which is at the basis of how these linkages are structured, and the integration of arrays which means that the various segmented narratives are seen as tightly knit and complementary. It is through this set of narratives that we arrive at a proper digital discourse, seen precisely as indicated in the subject of our roundtable today, seen as a compact multilinear argumentation, such as is possible only within the format of a website. Thank you. It was a bit confusing because I kept jumping.
We go on to.
So I'm going to move on to present another integrated website, the Critique of Archaeological Reason, which we've been working on since 2013, more or less, give or take. So this website is dedicated to the theoretical and methodological side of things. And with it, we are trying to build not only a useful resource, but also a place where the reader or user, as we might call them, can delve more deeply into certain topics. And I will get back to this also in terms of core narrative a bit later. So, as you can see, Giorgio Buccellati is the main editor of the site, and I serve as associate editor. And we also have an editorial board whose members both offer advice on our plans and will provide peer review as we continue so guaranteed. The website is conceived in the first place as a companion to Giorgio Buccellati's volume, printed volume, A Critique of Archaeological Reason, which was published in 2017 by Cambridge University Press. As such, it provides a documentary basis for the argument presented in essay form in the book itself and expands on specific themes and other aspects. And the second goal of the website is to serve as a tool for research in this area, offering a venue for the scholarly publication of data and ideas regarding archaeological theory. So the website is divided into three main, but of course closely connected sections. The first is the project itself, which most directly contains supplementary material for the printed book. Then we have what we are calling the forum, which has the content in terms of literature and theory, and is where the core narratives are further developed. Finally, we have the utilities section, which deals with practical matters. So to explain what we've already done and what we're planning to do, I will look at each of these in a little bit more detail. As mentioned, the first section relates most directly to the printed volume. It includes an introduction to the website itself and how it expands on and supports the argument in the book. It has short sections of the book itself. Unfortunately, we cannot actually put the whole book up here due to copyright issues. And we have bibliographical and explanatory notes directly referring to specific sections in the book itself. The forum is developing the theory and methodology on a number of levels and provides resources as a way into studying various aspects of archaeological theory more broadly. The bibliography is currently the most extensive, and we have to date over 500 entries. As you can see, we have actually labeled here the stage we're at, so you can see that total amount at in the beginning here. See? Okay. Now, this bibliography is not simply a list of literature relevant to archaeological theory. Rather, each entry has a critical summary that offers a short assessment of the work as well as how it relates to the main argument in the printed volume. As you can see, each entry is also directly linked to section where it occurs or is relevant. So here, for example, let me just see. Work? Yeah, okay. So we have here over on the right-hand side, direct links to the notes in the book, and links in this case to themes that we will see in a second over here on the left-hand side. And the same thing will occur with other sections of the website as a whole. So there are links also here to excerpts, reviews, monographs, and so on. Okay. Now, the excerpts and summaries contain more extensive critical summaries of a particular text, along with particularly pertinent, more extensive excerpts as well. So I'm just going to give you one example here of an entry that has both more extensive summaries and quotations. So in this case, you can see that each chapter has received a little summary, and at the bottom of this, we have quotations that are of particular interest to us in a more, again, more extensive form. The reviews, they are exactly that. They are more extensive reviews of a specific work or a collection of work by a specific author. And again, thinking about the relevance to the overall argument. The themes instead develop deeper arguments around a topic or theme. This is perhaps more similar to an article or an extended essay. And again, it's integrating links to other entries throughout each of these themes. I'm giving you here the example of the theme of broken traditions. I've chosen this one partly because it's quite relevant to what we're planning to do next. And also because, as you can see, it has several authors. So we have the option of giving voices to more than one person in this particular part. Finally, we come to the digital monographs. Now, these are important because they act as the core for further developing certain narratives, in particular these digital narratives that we've already seen. These digital monographs allow for an even deeper immersion into a specific topic. Now, we call them monographs, but actually we don't necessarily want them to be by a single author. But rather include contributions from a number of scholars, experts, and stakeholders. The digital medium means that we can maintain this core narrative and integrate it into the website as a whole. It also means that we can extensively link to the other sections, so the bibliography, the excerpts, the reviews, the themes, and so on, as well as chapters in the printed volume and having data concerning authorship. Okay, our third section, as I said, deals with the practical matters and tools for using the website. The indices facilitate searching on the website, since at the moment we don't have a separate search function. So here you can search